Hi, I'm Hobie1. This is Red Chair Reading. I'm reading the Black Book of Secrets by F.E. Higgins. We're on Chapter 18. Let's go. Extract from the Black Book of Secrets, The Butcher's Confession. My name is Horatio Cleaver, and I have a dreadful confession. Guilt has driven me to the brink of madness. I cannot sleep. Instead, I pace the floor until dawn, going over and over in my head what I have done. I desire only one thing, to be freed of my terrible burden. I know people think I am a fool, both as a man and as a butcher. I lack the talent that my father, Stanton, had, and I am the first to admit it. He was a true master of his trade. His skill with a cleaver was unrivaled, and he won every butcher's competition in the county for his speed and precision. They called him Lightning Stan. To Pagus Parvians, he was the greatest hero since Mick MacMuckle. Who comes up with these names? Could it be Higgins? Mick MacMuckle, the one-armed blacksmith who could shoe a horse blindfolded. To me, he was a beast. When my mother was alive, I was spared the worst of his excesses. But she died, still a young woman, and I was left at his mercy. He was a sly fellow, you see. To the villagers, he was a cheerful chap, always ready to flatter the ladies with a joke and with the gentlemen. But away from the counter, out the back, in the cold store, he was a different man. He was a monster. He beat me every day with anything he could get his hands on. Pig's legs, rump, steaks, even chickens with their feathers still on. At the time, he told me I should be grateful to him for teaching me his trade. Nobody else would have you, he said, and I began to believe him. I was so nervous that I made even more mistakes, and he became angrier. He laughed at my spelling, yet wouldn't allow me any schooling. He mocked my stammer, knowing that only made it worse. As for my work, I did my best, but I'm no carver. I'm all fingers and thumbs. What's left of them, as punishment or for a joke, he would lock me in the ice store until my hands were so stiff I couldn't bend them around a knife. My life was miserable. At night I slept on the sawdust behind the counter, while he snoozed upstairs in front of a warm fire with a glass of whiskey. I wanted to run away, but he had me so scared I couldn't think straight. So I suffered the lashing of tongue and belt, and inside I seethed like a mountain about to explode. And then there was Jeremiah Ratchet. My father saw in Jeremiah a kindred spirit, namely a glutton with an insatiable appetite for money. And the two would sit by the fire in the room above the shop well into the early hours, sipping ale and brandy, while I waited on their every whim. Pour us another, please, Horatio, Jeremiah would say mockingly, and the two would burst out into throaty laughter. Or, remind me, Horatio, how much is your lamb? 12 pennies a pound. One day Jeremiah came in laughing. I see you have a new product, he said, pointing to a sign in the window, a sign I had written. To my shame, it read, Mice meat, pays, 3 pence each. Mice meat pies, bellowed my father, grabbing a chicken, his face puce with rage. That night I realized I had nothing left to lose. The time had come to fight back. They say revenge is a dish best eaten cold. I served it up hot and steaming. The next evening my father sat down, as usual, to a hearty meal of potatoes and pie, one of my own creations, and Jeremiah joined him as he often did. To see these men at the table was repulsive in the extreme. They ate, as if they had only hours to live. Barely was one mouthful masticated before another was crammed in. Gravy dribbled down their chins. Gross. Pie crust clung to their greasy cheeks, and their napkins were spotted with food. I watched, fascinated, and repelled at the same time, as they tucked in, for they had just eaten a very special pie. Mice meat, indeed. The very morning I woke to the sound of agonized screams from upstairs. I found my father groaning and writhing on the bed. His face was covered in pus-filled boils. Sweat ran from his brow. And his breathing was rapid and painful. He was clutching at his stomach, and every so often he would let out a screech of pain. I called for Dr. Moldered. But by the time he arrived, it was clear to us all that my father was on the verge of death. Moldered seemed perplexed. Well, although I think it is probably a malfunction of the heart, I am a little puzzled by the boils. How peculiar. Has Mr. Cleaver been bitten by a rat? I could feel my own face burning and my heart racing. Whatever his illness, it wasn't from a rat bite, more likely from biting a rat, possibly the one I had served up to him in the pie from the night before. Or maybe it was another of my ingredients. The recipe was simple. If it was dead, it went in. Hair, fur, paws, claws, and all. There was a minced mouse, 2 fistfuls of hard-backed beetles, plump bluebottles, and juicy purple worms, not forgetting the toad I found on the road, squashed by a cartwheel. I watched my father for a day and night, and all the time he moaned in agony. I berated myself for my stupidity. I had only wanted to punish him. I didn't want him to die. But die he did. He exhaled his last breath as I stood over him. And what did I feel? Everything: remorse, guilt, rage, and relief. I closed his eyes, covered him up, and went for Dr. Moldered. "Heart attack," he said wearily, without even opening his bag, and left almost immediately. Of course, the villagers mourned his passing. "What shall we do without Stanton?" they cried. "Who shall represent us in the country competition?" "I could try," I said once, and they looked at me as if I were a piece of gristle in a cheap pie. Well, with my father gone, my life should have taken a turn for the better, but I hadn't reckoned on the guilt that would consume me, or on Jeremiah Ratchet. A few days later, he paid me a visit. I hadn't seen him once the night of the fatal meal. I hadn't seen him once since the night of the fatal meal. He was as white as a leaf starved of the sun, and his bloodshot eyes were sunken into his dry flesh. "I have a bone to pick with you," he said sternly, "or should I say foot?" He held out his hand, and there on his palm was a tiny but unmistakable rat's big toe. "I found it between my teeth," he said, "after that pie you served us, the one that made me sick as a pig for the last 3 days. The same pie that killed your father. I see you buried him quick enough." My heart froze in my chest, and I managed to stammer, "Mr. Ratchet, what do you mean? If the pie killed my father, then how come you're still alive and well?" Good point. Ratchet narrowed his eyes. Obviously, I didn't eat the rest of the poisoned rat. He leaned over the counter so I could smell his sour breath. "I'll be keeping an eye on you," he said. And he left, but not before helping himself to a couple of fine steaks and a piece of mutton, although he ignored the pies. And because I didn't stop him, Jeremiah knew that he was right. What a cruel and fickle mistress fate is, to kill one and yet to leave the other to torture me. Ratchet comes every week and takes what he pleases, a goose or two, a pheasant, a piece of beef. How long will that satisfy him? What will happen to me if he tells? I know what I did was wrong, but must I suffer on its account for the rest of my life? Is there no respite for this agony? I am not a man without a conscience. I am deeply ashamed of what I have done. But I don't know how much longer I can endure this torture. I have not slept through the night since the day my father was buried. If this is interesting to you, please boop the like button. You'll help the video spread to other people, and thank you very much. That will encourage me to continue these readings. Let's go. Ludlow put down his quill, laid a sheet of blotting paper between the pages, and closed the book. I can give you respite, said Joe, and he looked into Horatio's troubled eyes. Your secret is safe in the book now, I swear to you. Horatio sighed deeply, and the lines on his brow slowly disappeared. His eyes brightened, and he yawned widely. I feel better already. He stood up, but hesitated to take the coins that Joe offered, a substantial amount. Mr. Zabadow, I feel it is I who should be paying you. Joe shook his head. Not at all, Mr. Cleaver. It is a fair exchange. Very well, said Horatio, and made his way to the door, where he stopped for a moment. I swore I would never bake a rodent pie again, but I cannot deny there are days when I am tempted. Every time Jeremiah Ratchet comes in, striding about as if he owns the place, flaunting his posh clothes and smelling like a perfumery, wouldn't I like to give him one more special? The day will come when you will not have to suffer that man any longer, said Joe. Ratchet'll get what's coming to him. Just be patient. Joe took Horatio to the door, and Ludlow sat silently at the table. Horatio's story had reminded him of things he wished to forget. Ludlow knew what it was like to have a violent father. What bad luck for Horatio to be born to such a man. But did that mean he had been destined from birth to murder him? Joe watched as Horatio made his way back to the butcher's. He waited until he saw him go into his shop and the light go out upstairs. He smiled. Horatio was going to sleep tonight. But there were others who wouldn't. That's the end of chapter 18. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you again in chapter 19. Bye.